Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching a video about network monitoring. In this video, we'll talk about some network monitoring utilities, including packet sniffers, port scanners, IDS and IPS, which we'll see that stands for Intrusion Detection software and Intrusion Prevention software. Then we'll take a look at our system logs, event logs, and history logs. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about network monitoring utilities. Now, there are many different reasons that you would want to monitor a network, and some of them I have listed here. We talked about performance a couple videos ago, and well, in order for us to maintain optimal performance, part of that process is to do some monitoring to make sure we're there. Maintenance is another reason, right? Make sure that everything's still functioning. How about security? Yeah, we might want to monitor our network to make sure no one's breaking in, stealing stuff, spying on us, all that fun stuff. Now, there are many different utilities which can be used to monitor a network. And some of them that we'll look at here are things like packet sniffers, port scanners, and then of course we'll look at the IDS and IPS software. So first, what is a packet sniffer? Well, the first thing I'll tell you is that packet sniffers can be either hardware or software. Okay? They are usually thought of as software. Usually they're software utilities, but they also can be an actual piece of hardware. Now, what do? Well, they're used to capture and listen to transmissions which are traveling on a network. Okay? So a packet sniffer is just that. It's sniffing out packets on the network. It's taking a look at everything that's communicating on a network. It's looking at all those packets that are zipping all over the place. And then it captures a copy of those packets, and then it opens those packets, looks at those packets, and sees, well, what's going on in the network. Now, as you can imagine, this can be used to both help find vulnerabilities in your network. Right? You might find where there's some weak spots in your network. And I'll tell you, one of the ways that that's done is by looking to see if you can find unencrypted data that maybe is of a secure nature that should be encrypted. Okay? In other words, if the sniffer is able to just go ahead and grab a packet, open it, and look at it and read it, and hey, you got free reign at it, well, then that could be a potential vulnerability if that's some kind of secure information that you don't want to have that way. But it also can notify you of a possible intrusion. If you see extra transmissions taking place on a network that otherwise shouldn't be there, well, then that means that you may have an intruder. You may have somebody there or something there that doesn't belong. So packet sniffers are something that are used quite heavily and quite regularly by network administrators. Now, another type of network monitoring utility would be something called a port scanner. And a port scanner is used to look for open ports on a network or on a system. Now, I say on a network or a system because we may use a port scanner on a firewall to show us what ports are open or allowed to pass through, which means that they're open for the network, open to communicate with the network. Or you can also run a port scanner on a specific system, a specific computer, a specific server, to see what ports that server is willing to communicate on. Now, typically, port scanning is done through software, and quite frankly, I'll tell you what, I've never seen it as a piece of hardware. I've never seen a hardware port scanner, but I'm going to still leave it at typically because, you know, I haven't seen everything. I suppose there could be some kind of port scanning hardware tool that's out there, but typically it is done through software. Now, port scanners are used by administrators and attackers to recognize potential vulnerabilities. But here's the difference. It's used by an administrator to recognize potential vulnerabilities, right? Find out where there's certain ports that are open that maybe shouldn't be, so that you can help protect your network. And I will tell you that it's not always just finding ports that are open that shouldn't be. Sometimes it's a matter of realizing which ports have to be open and then finding other ways to protect those open ports. Whereas the attackers, of course, are going to also look for these potential vulnerabilities, and then they are going to attempt to attack through them. So port scanners are looked at as both something that is used by administrators to help protect and then by attackers to help hack into a network. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that if you recognize that there are ports that do need to be open, that you need to find other ways to maybe help protect the network and protect those openings. Well, one of the things that you can do to also help protect your network is implement either an intrusion detection software, or an IDS, or an intrusion prevention software, IPS. Now, what's the difference? Well, an IDS, or intrusion detection software, is used to watch for network patterns, certain network patterns which could represent an attack on a system or a network. And again, I'm saying system or network because there are IDSs that are designed to protect or watch for certain symptoms on specific individual computers or systems. And then there are also IDSs that can be put in place to look at the network as a whole and protect the network. Now, the thing that makes an IDS different than an IPS is that with IDSs, a log is maintained and or an administrator can be notified when one of these patterns that represent a typical attack or what looks like a typical attack has happened. Okay, and let me give you an example of one. An example might be a port scan. A port scan can be recognized by a number of ports being attempted to be communicated with, sometimes sequentially, or even if it's just a number of them in a short enough time frame. That's an example of a port scan maybe is taking place. So the IDS may go ahead and notify the administrator and say, hey, I think you have somebody who's scanning your network right now. Whereas an IPS, the intrusion prevention software, goes a step further to where it's also been designed to automatically attempt to stop the attack. Now, typically an IPS will also notify the administrator, but an IPS will also be a little more sophisticated to where it will recognize a potential attack, and then it may actually shut down an area of a network, or shut down a system, or even just shut down certain ports. There's a number of different things that an IPS can do, but it's just a matter of taking it a step further and actually preventing the attack, as opposed to just detecting that there might be one and then leaving it manually into the hands of the administrator. But both of these types of software are considered to be pretty much kind of the same thing. It's the same general idea. Look for well-known patterns. Look for patterns of attack that we're familiar with, that we know represents what could be an attack, and then at a minimum keep a log entry of it. If a certain threshold of attack has been crossed, make sure you notify somebody. And then if we really want to take it to the extreme, possibly start shutting things down. Now, the thing you want to be careful of when it comes to the IPS, when it comes to the actual shutting of things down, is you want to be careful because there's a lot of patterns that can represent a false positive, and you don't want false positives inconveniencing your network, inconveniencing your users by shutting things down. Matter of fact, one of the things that you really have to be careful of with your IPS is that if an intruder or a potential intruder is aware of the fact that you have the IPS in place, well, they may go ahead and do stuff that looks like an attack, even though they were never really going to come into your network. But they're going to do it because they know that the IPS is going to shut things down, so it becomes a form of something called a denial of service attack. They're kind of getting your own system to shut itself down and take away services. And so you want to be really careful of that. And that's why you really only want to use IPSs when you really know specifically that you're going to protect something to an extreme, even if it could be a false positive. So keep that in mind. Alright, now when it comes to the logs, we have system logs, event logs, and history logs. And I'll tell you what, if you look at the definitions, well, it's kind of the obvious. System logs maintain information about system-related events. Event logs maintain events, or a log of events which take place on a system. And history logs maintain a history of events which take place on a system or a network. So it's kind of just what it sounds like. And there is actually some overlap. I mean, I've had some people ask me straight out, well, wait a minute. I thought the event logs included something called a system log. So wouldn't that be one and the same? Well, kind of yes. And we're going to take a look at this in just a moment. But I just want you to really keep in mind that system logs are talking about system-specific events, things that are right down to the operating system, things that are taking place with the operating system specifically. Whereas event logs, by definition the way we have it here, is just saying events, just things that are taking place in general. And then history, I'll tell you what, history can either be a history of other event logs, or it could also be, and here's a really great example that a lot of people don't think of because everyone wants to jump to, in Microsoft world, they want to jump to the event viewer and the event logs, and they don't really think of the fact that history logs, an example that might be like the logs that a proxy server might keep. See, a proxy server is going to go ahead and keep a history of websites that your users have connected to. So there's an example of some history logs or historical logs that really have nothing to do with the event viewer and the event logs in the Windows operating system. Now, speaking of the event logs in the Windows operating system, let's take a look at these real quick. Now, on this machine, I'm running Windows XP, so I'm going to hit Start. And I will tell you what, typically you think about looking at logs on your servers, but even though I'm running a client operating system here, Windows XP, we can still look at some logs. So I'm going to go to the control panel in this case, I'm going to go to Performance and Maintenance, and then go to Administrative Tools. Now, depending on what type of machine you're working on, there are different ways to get to the administrative tools. Matter of fact, if you're working on a server, you'll find administrative tools right on the start menu. Even in Windows XP, you can add administrative tools in a way to the start menu. But one way or another, you have to get to them because in your administrative tools, well, here we have the event viewer. And if I double click on that, let me go ahead and maximize this out, you'll see that there's a number of different logs here. And here we have the system log. And this is where we are going to see a log of system-related events. Okay? And you'll notice that typically they will either be an information entry, just meaning something happened with the system, but it happened like it was supposed to. Or we might see this yellow triangle with an exclamation mark in it, and that's a warning. And I'm not sure if I have any on this system, but the other form would be, I don't see any here. We'll see if we see one on another log, but it would be a red circle with an X in it, which would be an error. Now, the difference between a warning and an error is a warning means that something didn't exactly go the way it's supposed to, but we haven't actually seen a true system failure as a result. Whereas with an error, something didn't go the way it was supposed to, and we did see an actual failure as a result of it. So here, for instance, you'll notice I have a warning right up at the top, and it's the W32 time source. Now let me double click on this, just so we can go in, and you'll see here that it says that the time service has not been able to synchronize the system time for, wow, a lot of seconds. I don't know how long 49,152 seconds is, but that's a lot, because none of the time providers has been able to provide a usable timestamp. So the system clock is unsynchronized. Now, in Microsoft land, it is important, if you're going to be part of a domain, that you have time synchronization, or else you may not be able to log into the network. So what this is telling me is it's giving me a warning saying you're not synchronizing with a time server successfully, and the result is you could get out of sync, and then you might have some actual failures. And I will tell you that if I let this go long enough, it is possible that this warning will become an error. So this is an example of system logs or system logging, where you have system-related events. Now, a couple other logs that we always have on all Windows systems is the application log. Hey, there's some errors. Knew we'd find something somewhere. No system is that perfect. But anyway, the application log, believe it or not, is really more of an example of just your typical event log. What it's doing is it's just logging events as they are related to different applications on this particular computer. Or another example of an event log would be the security log. Now, my security log is empty because I don't have auditing enabled. Now, auditing is the process of keeping track of security-related events. And if I had auditing enabled, then you would see entries here as these different security-related events were taking place. But again, these are just different events, different happenings of things on this particular machine. So I just wanted you to kind of try to get the idea that you have your system-related events, you have kind of all other events, and then again, as far as history goes, I don't really have anything here to specifically show you a history log, other than, again, if I were to, here's an example, if I were to maybe right-click and then say Save Log File As, and then go in and actually save this log, and maybe from there I would go through and save a number of different logs over a period of time and create a history of events. Or like I said, if this were a proxy server, I might look at the history of websites that were visited. I mean, I suppose technically, although it's not really a log, if I go to Internet Explorer and then I click over here, and I don't want favorites, but I go to history and I take a look at all the pages that were visited, oh, maybe I can go through and take a look and see what the history is of what web pages have been visited. That would be an example of a history log. So let me go ahead and close out of all this. And that pretty much takes us to the end of this video. And at this point, you should be able to describe the purpose of using network monitoring utilities. You should be familiar with a few of these utilities. And you should be able to describe the purpose of logging. And you know, there's one thing I want to specifically mention here about logging. And that is, if you're gonna keep logs, one of the most important things that I can tell you about these logs, I mean, we could go back and we could take a deeper look at them, and we can talk about all sorts of different settings that you can set on them and this and that. But I'll tell you what, above and beyond all of that, the number one thing that I'm going to tell you that you should always keep in mind when it comes to logging is look at them. Review the logs regularly. That is one of the biggest problems that I've ever seen when it comes to logging, is that people keep all kinds of logs and never look at them. And so the result is that, well, bad things happen and you don't even realize they're happening because you're not looking at the logs. So really, that's the main purpose of logging, is so that you can look at them. All right, well, that's all I got for you. I'll see you in the next video.